Hello, this is Tony Heller from WorldClimateScience.com. 10 years ago, Nobel laureate Al Gore sold his global warming television network to a bunch of oil producers for $500 million. Al Gore also flies around in a private jet while telling everybody else not to use fossil fuels. Scientific American supports Al Gore's hypocrisy and says that it is irrelevant. And they say that he pays offsets for his carbon emissions. This was an idea which was originally pioneered by the Catholic Church. If you paid your indulgences to the church, your sins would be forgiven. For decades, Al Gore has been jet-setting around the world trying to get fossil fuels banned for the poor and middle class. Here's a recent article from the New York Times. Al Gore on extreme heat and the fight against fossil fuels. The past few weeks have him even more worried than usual. Everywhere you look in the world, the extremes have now seemingly reached a new level, he told me in an interview. The temperatures in the North Atlantic and the unprecedented decline of the Antarctic sea ice, and lots more hysterical claims similar to these ones. Let's start examining Al Gore's claims by going back 16 years. At the Nobel Prize ceremony in 2007, he said the world was spinning out of kilter and predicted the Arctic would be ice-free by the year 2014.
Another new study to be presented by U.S. Navy researchers later this week warns it could happen in as little as 7 years. 7 years from now. In the last few months, it has been harder and harder to misinterpret the signs that our world is spinning out of kilter.
And since he made that prediction in December 2007, average Arctic sea ice extent has increased. Al Gore had no idea what he was talking about, and the Nobel Prize Committee awarded him handsomely for his ignorance. Al Gore says we're having unprecedented heat, but the data shows the exact opposite. Through July 25th, the percent of the United States to have reached 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius sometime during the year is at a record low. In 1931, 91% of the United States had reached 95 degrees Fahrenheit by July 25th. This year, the percentage is less than half that at 44%. As carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere, the aerial coverage of heat waves in the United States has sharply declined. And also, as carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere, the frequency of hot days in the United States has sharply declined as well. There is zero scientific basis for demonizing fossil fuels. Al Gore is using propaganda, not science. The U.S. temperature record is extremely important because it's one of the few places in the world with high-quality long-term daily temperature data. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration has daily temperature data going back 100 years from the United States, parts of Western Europe, Eastern Australia, and not much of any place else. The U.S. government actually has no idea what daily temperatures were for most of the world going back 100 years. So let's take a look at another place where there is daily temperature data from 100 years ago, Eastern Australia. This CSIRO paper from 70 years ago showed very clearly that Australia was much hotter prior to 1910. This data is very inconvenient for people who are pushing global warming, so the Australia Bureau of Meteorology has since hidden all data prior to 1910. Hiding data is a common propaganda tactic used by government agencies. With the U.S. temperature record, the tactics are a little bit different. What they do is alter the data rather than hide it. In 1999, NASA showed a cooling trend in the United States from the 1930s through the end of the 20th century, but they've since altered that data to show a warming trend during the same time period. 1934 was the hottest year on record in the United States, more than half a degree Celsius warmer than 1998. But they erased the heat of 1934 and made it cooler than 1998. Al Gore's claims about extreme heat are nonsense. Now let's look at Al Gore's claim that over the last few weeks we've seen an unprecedented decline of the Antarctic sea ice. This is a fascinating claim because it's the middle of winter in Antarctica and temperatures are extremely cold. You can see how the sea ice around Antarctica has grown since the beginning of July. This is what it looked like on July 1st, and this is what it looked like on July 24th. The growth of Antarctic sea ice has been slower this year than the 1981 to 2010 average. 9 years ago, the growth of Antarctic sea ice was much faster than the 1981 to 2010 average, and nobody was getting hysterical about that. In fact, the large sea ice extent around Antarctica in 2014 was widely blamed on global warming. So whether the ice extent is high or whether it's low, it gets blamed on global warming either way. Over the past 45 years, Antarctic winter sea ice has been trending upwards. 2 years ago, Antarctica had their coldest 6 months on record. Satellites show no trend in Antarctic temperatures over the last 45 years. But Al Gore and the New York Times say that Antarctica is melting down in the middle of winter. Here's a similar hysterical article from the Washington Post. Floods, fires, and deadly heat are the alarm bells of a planet on the brink. Let's take a look at the Washington Post claims. We've already seen that 1931 had the most widespread heat in the United States, and this year so far is a record low. 1931 was also one of only 2 years in the United States with more than 50 million acres burned. This year so far has also been a record low for burn acreage in the United States. Through July 26, burn acreage in the United States is at an historical low. 1931 was a very bad year for heat and fires, and it also brought the deadliest flood in world history. Millions of people drowned in China when 50,000 square miles of the country was flooded. These claims from Al Gore, the New York Times, and the Washington Post are the exact opposite of reality. There is no climate crisis, but there is a war on affordable, reliable energy for the poor and middle class. Henry Kissinger said, "Who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. Who controls money can control the world." Toto has been pulling back the curtain on the climate scam for the past 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki Upla, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.